Hello, everybody, and welcome to the sixth episode of the Fifth Paradigm podcast. I, Rishita, along with Madhav, will be hosting this episode. Our topic for today's episode is understanding the changing dynamics within the OIC and the GCC and its impact on South Asia in the current times. Today, we have with us Professor Tridivesh Singh Maini to shed us more light on this topic. Professor Maini is an assistant professor within the Jindal School of International Affairs at OP Jindal University. He is a regular contributor for The Hindu, The Millennium Post New Delhi, The News Lahore, The Friday Times Lahore, The Great Times Beijing, and The Diplomat. He has also published in academic journals including Asian Ethnicity. Professor Maini has worked earlier with the Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi, the Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore, and the Indian Express, New Delhi. Welcome to the Fifth Paradigm, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very warm welcome to you, sir, on the Fifth Paradigm. Sir, the first question that I'd like to ask you is, and we can start off with understanding the latest developments in the GCC or in the Gulf region, especially with the Abraham Accord signed between Israel and the UAE. So if you could shed a little more light on these recent developments, and then we can move forward.
So at the outset, thank you for this generous introduction and for giving me the opportunity to share my views. This is a rather vexed and complex issue, but before I begin discussing, the first question which you've asked me, before I actually respond to it, the first thing which you need to look at is that this clearly reiterates the Abraham Accord, reiterates the need for pragmatism, flexibility, and the fact that the geopolitical developments, not just in the Middle East but globally, they're changing. Things are happening so fast, whether especially in the aftermath of the pandemic, or countries will need to be even more deft and pragmatic in adjusting to the changes which are taking place, because daily something new is happening. So there are lessons from this Abraham Accord. Now, obviously, we've already read about, I'm sure, the newspapers provide details about the logistics of the Accord, about how economic linkages will be built up. We've already had one inaugural flight, right, between Israel and UAE. Now, while, the Accord has been signed recently, I think over the last couple of years, given the fact that, Iran's relations were going downhill with both the GCC countries as well as Israel, that was the starting point of this changing dynamic, within the Middle East. So it's not happened overnight. I think there are certain reasons. I mean, the most important dynamic, actually, the most important reason is the Iran factor. So the fact that both had strained ties with Iran played a role in, GCC countries becoming more open to Israel. And behind the scenes, the US has also played a very important role in this. And as you would be observing, I think 15 September, this is going to be formalized, the UAE-Israel agreement. And then after that, Oman has already given signals that it is keen to go ahead with a similar agreement. Bahrain has also said so, right? So basically, there are a number of factors involved. The first is obviously the key factor, I think, initially, which paved the way for this was Iran. Basically, in the last few years, if you notice, there has been this narrative within the Middle East. But Israel has been saying, for instance, that the main threat to peace is not the GCC countries, it is Iran. Right. Last couple of years, if you see multilateral forums, also you see a total change in the narrative of even GCC countries vis-a-vis Israel. And then, as I said, there have been a lot of back channel developments and all that. So, what is interesting, however, is that while in the case of Bahrain is one case, and then the cases of UAE and Oman are also going to be interesting, because UAE has also been recently engaging with Iran also. UAE's ties with have actually improved. During the pandemic, they've been in constant touch. They've been seeking to cooperate. So now that raises a question that, for all these agreements, can Iran be the only factor? Similarly, if you look at Oman, Oman's relationship with Iran is very different from many of the other GCC countries. So I would say that what this does is that this basically, obviously, that the sort of one dynamic which changes within the Middle East is that countries which have close ties with both, GCC countries and Israel have, lesser problem. They don't need to sort of, even though behind the scenes there were relations between both, but now they can engage both openly without any problem. This creates economic opportunities for both sides. At the same time, within the GCC countries and even in Israel, from time to time, obviously there will be criticism of these agreements, and the political actors on both sides will make some noises to show that that this is not a sellout, or they've not suddenly given up on their convictions or their principles and all that. So this is basically a lesson for all of us. Now, how it pans out, one doesn't know. But I would again reiterate that this is a clear lesson that, we keep on making predictions and forecasts every day about geopolitics globally, about the world order, about regions and all. So it's very tough to predict that. Second, you cannot afford to be too dogmatic. I mean, that applies to everybody and to every context. So in fact, we'll be coming to this later on when you ask me about South Asia. There are a lot of lessons with other regions, especially South Asia, can also draw from this accord, and the way, the GCC and Israel have shown the flexibility, the deftness to sort of change their approach towards each other.
Yes, sir. Yes. So you mentioned about the importance of Iran. Now, sir, it has often been said for the Chinese, and now is also being said for Iran, that speak softly but carry a big stick. And it is said that Iran is carrying a very, very big stick, irrespective of its past, especially after the 1979 Iranian Revolution. So where do you feel this Iran and China relationship that has been developing over a period of time? And we've also seen that within the OIC, if we see, there has been a formation of two different blocks. That is the Arab countries and the non-Arab countries. The Arab bloc with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And in the non-Arab countries, we have Pakistan, Turkey, Malaysia, and even Iran. So where do you feel the China-Iran relationship fits into this? And do you feel that China actually plays a major role within the OIC and the GCC as well?
See, I think there are two things we need to bear in mind. One, if you look at the China-Iran relationship in recent times, the 25-year agreement which they have signed has to be the sort of starting point. That is basically what is really, economic relations have been building up, but the strategic community, policymakers, everybody, their eyes are on this 25-year relationship, which means that a lot of the, if you look at the connectivity projects, if you look at China's connectivity initiatives, naturally they've got a boost. Iran has also given access, to China, to some strategic ports. And then, in terms of business relations, also it's been categorically said that if you look at some of the oil projects, whether connectivity or whatever, China will be given preference. Now, the first thing which you need to look at is, again, a lot in diplomacy is about posturing and about trying to sort of leverage, a particular situation. Donald Trump's intransigent approach towards Iran was one of the main reasons why it really veered suddenly towards China. It was left with no other option, if you look at it from the Iranian standpoint, right? Now, this agreement of 25 years, there are a lot of provisions which help the Belt and Road Initiative, which generally help, China in achieving some of its economic objectives, specifically in the context of Iran. By the way, the foundations for this were laid during Xi Jinping's visit in 2016, in the beginning of 2016, months after the JCPOA had been signed. But then, of course, it was just all verbal talk and more rhetoric. Then in 2019, the Iranian foreign minister visited China, the fine print was worked out, and now we've reached the situation where you have some rail projects, you have some in terms of the ports, access to ports and all that, things have been worked out. So, but largely I think Iran was left with no option as such in terms of, because what was happening was, if you look at it, whether you look at it from the context of the US or whether you look at the regional context, so in the US, Iran was probably would have had calculated that certain countries would take a tougher stance, would not totally kowtow or toe the US line. That did not happen, especially after 2019, after the removal, of these waivers, which were there, for instance, for the purchase of oil and all. Things did not go out the way Iran had calculated. So Iran actually needed to change its calculations, whether it's strategic, whether it's economic, whatever else. So this was the best option, given. And Donald Trump also, even in the midst of the pandemic, there has been no change, while other people have, other countries, including US allies, have been recommending that the US adopts a softer line. Some of the sanctions you've not seen any of that. Now, the key, the important X factor over here is that while it's easy to talk about this Iran, China, Russia, Pakistan sort of axis, which is building up, Pakistan again will come to in greater detail later, but Iran, China, and Russia, right? Let's look at that. We also want to keep in mind that suppose there is a change of presidency in the US, the approach towards Iran will change fundamentally. So there will be some flexibility, which means that Iran has other options. Because I think while at this point of time, the calculation for Iran is that this is the best bet, there is a lot of domestic criticism as well. And Iran also has generally followed an independent foreign policy. It does not want to be viewed as a stooge or an appendage. So a lot of opposition parties within Iran have also been critical of this agreement, and they're saying that there's been a lack of transparency and they don't know enough about it. If there's a change of guard in the US, I think that could change. Again, you could have a more calibrated sort of approach. Iran will definitely tilt towards China, but probably there will be some sort of pushback to the degree. It will not be to the degree, if it would not be like this agreement virtually. You're not going to see that sort of thing if the US policy changes towards Iran. So I think that is the first thing we need to bear in mind. How does the domestic politics in the US work out? And I think other countries too have calculated that you cannot be so, you cannot have this rigid stance vis-a-vis Iran. I mean, all the neighbors and anybody, those who understand the geopolitics, the geography, the history of this region can have understood that the Trump's policy towards Iran needs to be calibrated, needs to be tempered a bit. So I think a change of guard in the US will also probably have an impact on how Iran what sort of approach Iran adopts towards other countries, right? And the second question was about the OIC, was it? China,
yes,
about China.
Yes, sir. China and its role in the OIC.
See, China's role, I would say basically China has close ties both with Iran and close ties with OIC. OIC countries have been balancing their relations. They have good ties with China, they have good ties with the US and everything. But what is more pronounced these days is China's ties with Iran. I mean, that is more out in the open because of, as we had said, this agreement, the fact that tomorrow, even in Afghanistan, China is going to play an important role possibly in terms of not just economic linkages, but in terms of security as well. So now China's ties with the OIC and Iran are an important lesson that if you have economic leverage, then your options are endless. You don't have to choose, both sides are going to actually, OIC countries also realize the importance of China, and so does Iran, has no other alternative. So I think given it's China's economic rise, we all know, but even if you look at its connectivity projects and all, I think while it has faced certain setbacks, but a lot of countries in their own way are, getting on board the connectivity projects. And they also realize that while in the long run, naturally, economic linkages with China, they are problematic, but in the short run, there is no alternative which is emerging to them. Even the OIC countries, which have close ties with the US, realize that, so far, the US cannot fill in for China. So that's it's a very peculiar sort of situation that you realize the long-term implications, you realize the long-term challenges, but there are no short-term alternatives emerging as such. And the other problem also, if I may add,
Yes,
is
sir.
that the other issue is that, as far as the OIC is concerned, China doesn't have to do much. That there's an internal churning taking place. So I doubt that China is really playing much. China is definitely playing a role in the context of Iran. In the context of the OIC, a lot of other dynamics are at play. I mean, OIC is looking for on the one hand, it's looking, at changing dynamics with Israel independently, which is influenced by the US. On the other, it needs to from time to time keep on recalibrating its approach towards South Asia. Then OIC countries also need to keep in mind that, given the changing if you look at their vision documents of the future, they also have to keep in mind the domestic economic situation and how, that will also influence its outreach towards other countries. And given the fact that they're facing these sort of twin challenges, one of, as far as oil is concerned, if you look at, you can't have an oil economy any longer. And second, this pandemic, I think you won't see any real change in terms of their approach towards China, even though a lot of people could think that because they are close to the US behind the scenes, the US will try to ensure that the OIC, sort of slowly but surely, it tilts towards it. But OIC has managed to balance the relations really well. And I mean, if you look at it, even what the Chinese leadership has also done from time to time, if you look at the visits, they, many times they've been clubbed together. They'll go to GCC countries, they'll go to Iran. So they have given those clear signals that they are not going to seek to veer towards any one side. Both are equally important.
Sure, sir. Rishita?
Yeah. So, sir, you mentioned about U.S. relations and U.S.'s involvement in the Abraham Accord. So, and China's involvement within the GCC and the OIC. So, sir, what do you think are the global implications of these changing dynamics, and how will it impact these countries and in these countries?
So, see, first of all, the first thing which we will need to look at is, even if you look at the Middle East, as I said earlier, I'm reiterating the point that if there is a change of guard in the US, right, that is a very important X factor, because first of all, you have a very different global order then. I mean, basically, you have a situation where you move towards a more traditional sort of foreign policy approach, where the US will reach out to allies, right? And even the US approach towards allies and partners is not going to be so transactionalist, right, or short term. What we are seeing at this point of time is, while these are very important developments, you also need to factor in mind if you look at the US role, there is also a domestic sort of angle to it. If you look at the recent tweets of Donald Trump, for instance, he's trying to look at it, obviously, I mean, any politician, if he has some achievement, he's going to try and capitalize on it. So I think a lot of the analysts and the commentators are distracted by Donald Trump's role in the whole thing, whereas it's much more complex. I mean, basically, there are 2-3 things. One is, as I said, the global sort of world order, that if Trump comes again, you'll have a similar sort of situation. If Trump goes, the approach towards allies, towards partners is going to change. That's the first thing. Secondly, you're going to have less high optics. If you look at all these deals, these agreements, and the way you deal with that, there is going to be lesser focus on the optics and more on the ultimate sort of, what achievements or whatever you want to say. And most importantly, once the US actually engages with Iran, then the options for everyone, basically even for the US allies who at this point of time are wary of engaging with Iran, they increase. And if you look at the pandemic, you have had EU countries using the special purpose vehicle to help out Iran. Japan has also been helping out Iran in different ways, during the midst of the pandemic. So naturally, they're not totally on the same page as the US. So I think that is going to witness a major shift. For the time being, now this is long term. Now in the short run, definitely, I think if you look at countries, basically, as I said, you don't need to do any balancing now any longer between GCC and Israel. You can openly engage with both. You don't need to do it behind the scenes. You don't need to be worried about how Israel will react if you engage with GCC countries and vice versa. That is certainly one change which is going to happen. Now, this will also push a lot of other in other regions also. I think the approach towards conflicts is going to change. As I said, I mean, you can't basically there are no permanent enemies, and I also think that apart from the geopolitical part, apart from these complex triangles like the US, GCC, Israel, the Iran-China agreement, the China factor, great power politics and everything. I think there's also realization that generally in a post-pandemic world, even given the fact that the nature of the economies of all economies are going to be hit, other countries will also start looking. I think the zero-sum approach cannot work. So outside the region also, I think in a lot of conflict you're going to see. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the Korean Peninsula, I cannot comment upon. That's one thing. But other regions certainly will try to take a cue from what has happened in the Middle East. So, and if the world order actually post November 2020, if you see a change in guard, and there's also change generally in the way the US approaches the whole world order or tries to whatever, that could then further see some more openings for reduction of conflict in regions, where there are tensions and which are afflicted by economic problems and so on and so forth.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Now we spoke of the global implications. And so now moving on to South Asia, if I may. We recently saw the Pakistani Minister for Foreign Affairs, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, publicly coming out and criticizing the OIC and even Saudi Arabia for not taking a particular stance on the Kashmir issue, which it has been trying to push for a very, very long time. And then apart from that, we saw that there was a lot of damage control after that. General Qamar Javed Bajwa, he flew down to meet the Saudi royalty, and simultaneously we had Shah Mahmood Qureshi fly down to Beijing. So what do you feel has changed in South Asia, especially after this particular latest development? And where do you feel all of these countries, especially the Middle Eastern countries, impact and their relations impact the different relations in South Asia?
Okay. So I think first we should look at, if you look at South Asia, first we should begin actually with India, then I'll tell you. So if you look at the Indian options now, as I said, India is one example where now, as it is, in the last 4 years, there was no problem in terms of balancing between GCC and Israel. In fact, Israeli diplomats also openly said that, if you reach out to GCC countries, there's no problem. So that becomes much easier now. That's, you have your foreign policy options obviously increase in that context. It's not a headache that you need to balance out or whatever. That's the first thing. But your one challenge remains intact. That is about how do you, GCC Israel is fine, but how do you deal with Iran? Now, if you look at, and India has recently, in fact, there have been 2 back-to-back visits to Iran. And this is not to do only with the Chabahar project, because that's your only sort of gateway to Afghanistan and Central Asia. But this also has to do with the emerging the security situation in Afghanistan, and talks are also being held at this point of time, right? So where does India fit into that? And obviously you have to have a decent relationship with Iran. So that again, you want to prevent. So if you look at Iran, if you look at the Iran, US, China equation, naturally at this point of time, Iran will clearly veer towards China. But if you look at South Asia, in spite of China having more economic clout, Iran would not totally want to rub India the wrong way. So if things like the Chabahar port, your economic linkages somehow or the other you can manage to keep intact, that happens. So there'll be a sort of balance. And on strategic issues, the Iranians also, basically there's a lot of posturing and leveraging. So it's a sensible move actually to understand the importance of Iran and not totally only go to the American line on Iran. And probably there's also a calculation that just in case, if there's a change of guard, that will open up our options, and then dealing with Iran becomes easier. Right? As far as the GCC countries are concerned, naturally, there's an improvement. We know it's not, and the interesting part is no longer restricted only to remittances or oil. Of course, there has, I mean, one of the important things has been that GCC countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, they are investing in some important projects in India. And in terms of oil, strategic oil reserves also, the cooperation between India and GCC countries has been increasing. So, but India has also been seeking, investments in infrastructure, and probably now since GCC is focusing a lot on areas like digital, on tech, there is a lot of scope for both sides to work. So there's a diversification of relations where the earlier irritants don't come in the way, and obviously that is one of the reasons why GCC's ties with Pakistan have sort of gone down, and right, especially Saudi Arabia. Now, as far as Pakistan is concerned, if you look at when Imran Khan took over in 2018 in his first address, before he actually was sworn in, but after his victory, he actually spoke about balancing relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And generally that has been his stance. But we all know that, there are in every country there are various players in foreign policy. In Pakistan, the deep state plays an even more important. So as a result of, behind the scenes, a lot of things have been happening. So initially the tilt was towards Saudi Arabia, but then later on he also made visits to Iran, and but it's been a tough job to sort of balance out between both sides. Now, but ever since Saudi Arabia, India ties have improved, and Saudi Arabia, as you said, as you mentioned earlier, has not spoken up on certain issues which Pakistan expected to speak up on. Naturally, the Pakistan GCC relationship has gone down. But see, we should also not forget that at the end of the day, after, if you look at in terms of influence, three countries which have had massive influence on Pakistan's not just economy but domestic politics. You have obviously first earlier it used to be the US, then China, and Saudi Arabia. In fact, even backdoor deals. Whenever anybody gets out of power, like Nawaz Sharif, when he had to go on exile, he actually went to Saudi Arabia. The royal family played a role behind the scenes, and you also have very close defense cooperation between the two sides, right? So all those things are there. So I don't think, again, all of a sudden there's not going to be any major disruption. Though Saudi Arabia did one when General Qamar Javed Bajwa went to Saudi Arabia, he received a snub from the royal family. And two, if you look at, when Pakistan was in this economic crisis, Saudi Arabia was one of the countries which helped it out. And probably it has asked Pakistan to return a sizable, substantial amount. And Pakistan has had to borrow from China to repay Saudi Arabia, which has, been a major challenge. So I think that is, in the short run, I don't think that for various reasons, given their other challenges and given, the dynamics in the Middle East, I don't think Saudi Arabia will dump Pakistan. Obviously, just snub Pakistan. It's given a very, very clear message to that. And Pakistan too does not have too many options. It cannot see at the end of the day, if you look at it, even when the CPEC project had begun, just maybe useful. When Imran Khan took over as Prime Minister, one of the messages which he wanted to give was that the CPEC project, we need to reassess the CPEC project. And in fact, when he was out of power, he had even criticized the CPEC project. So he was looking at alternatives to China. Now, one of the major, if Pakistan doesn't have very good ties with the US, naturally the alternative is in Saudi Arabia. And then, as I said, in 2018 also, the first few visits, if you look at the aggressive diplomacy, it was usually GCC countries, and Saudi Arabia actually helped Pakistan out, and so did the others. And GCC countries had also said that they would be investing in the Gwadar port. In fact, that had caused a problem that had resulted in frictions, because the Chinese said that why have you, made this announcement without us knowing? Then later on, the Chinese have said they have no problem with it. So Pakistan is not left with too many options. Strategically, see, again, your economic imperatives and your strategic posturing. You need to distinguish between the two. To send a message to Saudi Arabia that it has other options strategically, it will keep on from time to time, saying that, have very close relations with Iran and keep on trying to cultivate closer ties with Iran. This fits into that China-Iran axis as well, which is against the US. So that way, it makes sense. But if it's the economic realities, right? So, who fills in for China? I mean, who's the other alternative? It's Saudi Arabia itself. So I don't think that. And the other thing is that, see, you can also, if you look at the Pakistan-Saudi relationship, either you have something to really offer in terms of your geopolitical dimension or in terms of economics, then it's a very different ball game. But Pakistan doesn't have much to offer Saudi Arabia apart from saying that it may get closer to Iran, and this may cause some irritation or whatever. There's nothing beyond that. So I don't even see that relationship is really going to change. Now, if I may, I want to just make a couple of points. What is happening, in fact, which you should look at in Pakistan, is a lot of observers and commentators are actually saying that if the GCC countries can adopt a pragmatic stance towards Israel, why should Pakistan not do it? So we are actually seeing, and during Musharraf's time, during Pervez Musharraf's time, in 2005, there were a lot of back-channel discussion between Pakistan and Israel to give diplomatic, sort of recognition. In 2019, Pervez Musharraf again spoke about, reassessing the Pakistan-Israel relationship. Now, does this impact India? I think what this does is, I think if Pakistan has a more of a less, if Pakistan is, it's not going to happen, but I'm just saying that if this sort of shift begins to take place within Pakistan, even in the intellectual discourse, even in narrative, it means that there is some space in the longer run for a more normal, maybe not a perfect relationship, but for a more normal India-Pakistan. It's not going to happen tomorrow, it's not going to happen day after. Because if with Israel it can open up, because with India, even in spite of all the problems, you do have some linkages here and there. You have people to people, your trade, you never really disrupt. Only last year, 2019, it happened. And moving away from the final thing, which I would like to say is probably for both India and Pakistan, there are lessons from the Middle East. Because, I mean, if you look at the relationship between the GCC and Israel, the India-Pakistan relationship has been one of, it's very interesting that even right after partition, after 1947, you had linkages, you signed the Indus Water Treaty, some linkages have always been there, you never really disrupted them. So, the one lesson could be that, if there is gradually, slowly but surely, if you look at the economic dynamics within the region, the pressures after the pandemic, maybe not right away, maybe when there is more political capital or whatever, I think the space for being less zero-sum, because look at the problems right now. For India to get access to Afghanistan, you have to look at the Chabahar port. You reduce your options. For Pakistan, if it wants, India can actually be a gateway to Southeast Asia and all. So even in connectivity terms, both countries, they reduce their options. And a better relationship between India and Pakistan, a reasonable one, will also help Pakistan, because then that could improve its ties with Afghanistan. Because currently, the fact that, on a lot of issues, the differences between Pakistan and Afghanistan are over India. Like, for instance, Afghanistan has been saying about, giving land access and all that. So that will also normalize. So what I would try, so today, while we're talking about, when you look at trilaterals, you often say India, Afghanistan, Iran. But a more logical thing, which has also been tried, but because of the, the complications on the other side, and then hyper-nationalism at times on this side, we don't look at common sense from a commonsensical approach. If you actually have an India, Pakistan, Afghanistan sort of corridor in terms of connectivity with South Central Asia, in the longer run, again, there are geopolitical ground realities and there are problems and all that, but that would make economically, that makes much more sense. And then if you're not bound by the zero sum, you also don't have to keep on looking for very tough alternatives. Now, if for instance, if both sides had a normal relationship, the Chabahar port would have not been, now you don't have any alternative but for Chabahar. So I think at least for the longer run, South Asia should learn, especially India and Pakistan, need to learn some lessons from what is happening in the Middle East. This may seem outlandish at this point of time, but in the longer run, I think this is needed.
Just to add to this, before we end, what I'd definitely like to ask you is the impact of this seemingly fractured relationship in the OIC on India, sir, in the long run as well as in the short run? Because considering the fact that India is an observer nation in the OIC, so how do all of these relationships impact India, whether directly or indirectly?
Okay, so now when you look at, I think the OIC itself, I think with the changing context within the Middle East, naturally the role of the OIC will also change. I mean, the aims, the objectives which were there initially. So, but I think even vis-a-vis the OIC, basically, I would look at it this way, that if the OIC is, I mean, if it helps India's foreign policy objectives, it's fine. But it should not be overly reliant on it, even within the GCC and within the OIC countries, because as I said, each country has its own dynamics, its relationships with India, its relationship, economic or strategic. It varies. There are degrees. So now with UAE and Saudi Arabia and now Bahrain, you're much closer. But on the other hand, if you have one size fits all approach towards the whole thing, then it becomes problematic. So where it helps you, where you can leverage it, it's fine. But on the other hand, also you got to be careful about how much you interfere in their politics over there. And the other thing which I would also like to add is that while we are looking at the strategic part, we also need to, I mean, not just India, the whole of South Asia is going to be impacted tremendously by the layoffs which are going to happen in GCC countries, because this will impact our remittances. Now that again, whether it's not just India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal and all, and that again provides a golden opportunity. I mean, obviously again, you forget Pakistan, but the other South Asian countries you can work with collectively to deal with this issue, because they're coming up with various policies to help the workers who are being laid off or returning from these countries in the aftermath of the pandemic. This issue is often glossed over because of the importance of the strategic issues and oil and all that. But the remittance part is very important in the context of the whole of South Asia.
Thank you, sir. Sorry for the confusion. So, sir, thank you, sir, for being with us today and sharing your views on this topic with us. We hope to have you with us on more episodes on the Fifth Paradigm. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much, sir.